Alright, let's do this one more time. Here we are, making matchups for the various villains of Fire Emblem's expansive roster, finally falling into the Switch era of games. If you've stuck around and watched the whole series, give yourself a pat on the back and thank you for doing so. And here we are trying to create interesting and thematically appropriate death battle matchups, and for that I have a few guidelines. First, no reusing characters, that's a hard rule. And my two soft rules, which are more guidelines, is to avoid reusing franchises, which is broken constantly, and to try and make matchups not using any characters Death Battle has used before, which I'm a little bit better on. Also, a note for this, I am not considering possible protagonists as villains, so even though we're entering the Switch era, Edelgard and Rhea are not on here. They already got their time to shine in my previous matchup series, so if you want to see their matchups, go there. But let's finish this once and for all. Just a note before we start, I had trouble determining anyone who could count as the villain of Tokyo Mirage Sessions that wasn't just Medeus again, so I had to skip that game. As for Fire Emblem Warriors, we have only one real option. Velazark versus Deathwing from World of Warcraft. World-destroying super dragons bent on annihilation who have been slain by a union of many heroes, even former enemies. Admittedly, there's not too much to talk about here. They're big dragons, one of which has very little personality, and they both blow up pretty much everything. Velazark is often given pretty high power due to the whole ripping holes in dimensions, but that's largely with the use of special conduit, like the world's Fire Emblem, rather than his own power, so I'm hesitant to give that to him. Deathwing, on the other hand, has incredibly clear and concise examples of raw power, and in one timeline at least, totally succeeds in killing all life and then himself. Meaning he's got provable statistics towards being able to wipe out all life in the World of Warcraft. Velazark has some tricks, like being able to possess others as a spirit, but that's a drop in the bucket against the flood of overpowering destruction Deathwing is bringing. And also, again, Velazark is basically just a big lizard with no actual personality, so let's move on. Entering into the era everyone loves, Fire Emblem Three Houses, with one of the few definitive villains, Talus, and his matchup, Bondrewd from Maiden Abyss. Subterranean dwellers who abandoned the surface in part to escape the wrath of those they'd wronged. Over their many years beneath the earth, they gathered and mastered the arts of body swapping and magic mixed with technology. Monsters of men who experiment on children and the weak to perfect their science, all in pursuit of some grand endeavor. But in doing so, they find only their own madness. A battle between these two would be fascinating, just from the kinds of artifacts that Bondrewd has at his disposal, such as Far Caress, a device that manipulates fleshy tendrils, which he primarily uses for restraining others or as a grappling hook. He also has Gangway, which fires beams of light that reflect to hit its target, and Shaker, which fires darts that pass on the Curse of the Abyss, an effect which persists in the titular Abyss of the story, causing everything from hallucinations to internal hemorrhaging. For a short duration, he can also use the Sparagmos, a sort of light that burns bright enough to disintegrate everything it encounters and causes unhealable wounds to his foes. He's even altered his own biology to be able to change into a more animalistic form with enhanced senses and strength, along with a prehensile tail. All of which may seem small compared to anything Talus can do, but then we get into Bondrewd's real trump card, his ability to share parts of his soul amongst many hosts and immediately take over their body should he die. It's so seamless and quick that Talus would have to beat all Bondrewd's bodies, and he might actually be able to do that. Talus is a 1,000-year-old dark mage and Agarthan technological guru that has the magical power to shake an entire city on a whim. He can use the electric and far-reaching Thoron spell, as well as the strongest variants of dark and black magic, Hades, Death, and Quake, all of which are amplified in range and power by his skills, like Dark Tome Fair and Dark Magic Range +1. He can seal strength and magic with the titular skills of the same name, and the Agarthan technology skill lowers the damage adjacent foes do to him, while Pavis can sometimes half the damage of incoming close quarters attacks. And finally, Defiant Magic boosts his power when his HP is lower than 25%. He can teleport, create force fields, and also wield weapons made of Agarthan technology that make wounds that are hard to heal. But his biggest trump cards are the Javelins of Light, which are just straight up ballistic missiles. No matter how many lives Bondrewd's got, good luck surviving all of those. If Talus has to, and if he were allowed, he can also trap Bondrewd within the forbidden realm of Zaharos, where his soul itself is sent, and therefore I doubt it would just transfer out, though that's entirely based on what Talus is allowed to use. For the fight itself, I'm not sure how you'd get them into a fight to begin with, besides maybe Bondrewd wanting Agarthan technology for himself, Talus trying to kill him because he's a dirty surface human. Bondrewd alone would likely die without much fanfare, but the real fight starts as Talus has to keep up with his constant rebirths, which would whittle him down bit by bit until he broke out the big guns like Quake and the Javelin's Blight. Finally, Talus would decimate Bondrewd enough times and finally get a hold of the last one before putting the filthy beast in his place before killing him. I personally think the sickest kill move would be for Talus to shove a crest stone into him and remake him as a demonic beast, making what Talus sees as his inside match his outside. It'd certainly be the most sadistic kind of death battle kill, and for once I'd be rooting for the underground vaporwave cultists. Okay, honestly, all the matchups for Nemesis I could find were absolute garbage. Nemesis versus Kai from Kung Fu Panda? Really? Nah, I got something much better. Nemesis versus Slave Knight Gale from Dark Souls 3. Once average mortal men who got involved with powerful people and wound up with some kind of longevity. One was made a slave and the other exalted to a king through their might, but both would fight ceasingly over their long years. As the height and the final word of humanity in their own worlds, Nemesis's ideology and Gale's ultimate fate are intertwined. Where Nemesis sought a world of humanity's will alone, particularly one built upon the backs of the weak, Gale saw that world come to pass as the last man standing, save for the Ashen One. And while both would find themselves killed, both would rise again as more monstrous selves, filled with darkness. Nemesis revived by the Agarthans and Gale suffused with the dark soul itself. But while Nemesis did it all for selfishness, Gale genuinely wanted to help his lady create a painted world where the outcasts and the meek could be safe, and he would die for that. Gale is by far the peak of Dark Souls bosses, and by the time you fight him, he's got more than a few ways to ruin your day. A broken sword that's lasted for eons and a fast-firing repeating crossbow that might as well be a submachine gun, and the souls within him also manifest as tracking projectiles, and deal dark damage and draw lightning down from the sky behind them, as even the world itself bends to his maddened state. He also retains the memory of the spell Way of White Corona, that sends discs of holy light that return to Gale even through objects, a useful gotcha move which could easily harm Nemesis. With similar old powers, he can teleport short distances as he does to ambush the Ashen One from behind via a summoning sign, and based off how he fights in endgame Ashen One, he's clearly able to keep up on the same physical plane Nemesis could. And Nemesis would probably be lacking a few key strengths from his normal fight, that being the 10 elites. I doubt he'd be given an army to work with since he doesn't summon them himself and rather they're just given to him. And that's assuming we use pre-resurrection Nemesis and not Nemesis in his prime during the War of Heroes. His Crest of Flames and the Sword of Creator give him incredible power, chances for healing, and if the lore is to be believed, the power to destroy mountains. Counterattack lets him respond to an attack from pretty much any distance. Heartseeker lowers the avoidance of nearby enemies, his Renewal skill allows for passive regeneration, and Cursed Power lets him heal while in the same poisonous swamps that seem to come with him. Miyazaki would definitely like him. The dynamic in this fight would be phenomenal. Two undead warriors, one a king upheld as the peak of humanity in his social Darwinian worldview, and the other a lowly man seeking to kill and consume the humanity within others to coalesce the dark soul. It's no wonder they'd ultimately fight. While Nemesis would see him like a raving beast, as the fight continued he'd recognize the true warrior within Gale, as Gale would finally go hollow as he does in his fight in Dark Souls, forgetting his purpose and ironically being able to fight like a proper warrior, finally rendering Nemesis a look into himself, the raving beast made a warrior. As the world around them burns, all that remains is the final victor left to scream into the coming darkness. And who would that victor be? Personally, I think it'd be Gale. Based off how they'd no doubt scale him due to his fight with Endgame Ashen One, then Gale's overall feats would be far more impressive than whatever we see Nemesis do. But honestly, I'm just satisfied with this matchup as a whole. Alright, let's be quick about this. Aelfric versus Severus Snape from Harry Potter. Magic guys working at a school with bad haircuts that are obsessed with the main character's mom and die because of it. Although, one dies as a good guy and the other dies as a crazy meatball dragon. Snape's spells consist of matter manipulation, summoning, healing grievous wounds, inventing curses, flight, telekinesis, pretty much all that Harry Potter stuff. He's shown resistance to mind control and suggestion, though that's not much of a worry with Aelfric, and he can cast the instant death spell, although I've heard varying accounts of how instant that instant death spell is. Meanwhile, Aelfric can summon swirling balls of fire, heal himself via Nosferatu, and depending on how you perceive the copies he makes as an umbral beast, he can summon meteors, seal speed and movement, and his transmute skill increases magical attack if he takes magical damage. Just as a normal dude, he'd give Snape a hard time, but if you include the Chalice of Beginnings, and the transformation tied to it, then he'd just be clowning on him, summoning endless waves of copies while himself being strong enough to possibly knock down a cathedral, and just generally being able to survive being smacked around by Byleth and the house leaders. Aelfric's kind of dull as a combatant, and I don't really care about Harry Potter, so I'll just say this matchup exists and move on. If you like it, great, but it's boring to me. Now to a character I really like, and a matchup that is truly inspired. One I had to get help figuring out, as some of you know, since I was having trouble finding anyone to pair with Epimenides, the original Lord of the Agarthans. I made a community post to ask some of you who watch these videos what you wanted to see. I got a lot of great responses and wonderful engagement. A big shout out to everyone who commented on the community post for your ideas, and thank you to Barry Red for this matchup. Epimenides versus King Solomon, the Grand Caster of Fate Grand Order. Age-old mages who ruled and were revered by their people for developing magic and artifacts that no one else could replicate. Whether intentionally or not, they would create a godlike being who would persist after their death, and in the end turn against their original desire. By the time of the story, they worked to manipulate the greater world towards their goal, and in particular the protagonists to one day see their vision come to fruition, and in their own eyes, save the world. Solomon, the wisest man to ever live and one of the few able to claim the title of Grand Caster in the Fate universe, is a mage unlike any others. Those of you who know Fate lore may wonder why I include Solomon and not Goetia, who is the actual villain in Fate Grand Order, and to me it's because that'd mess with the themes. Goetia is to Solomon what Arval is to Epimenides, the creation which circumvented the creator's will. While some aspects of Goetia's personality is better suited to Epimenides, the core of Solomon and Epimenides is actually closer. Both Solomon and Epimenides believe deeply in humanity and do what they do for its benefit, but they have very different experiences that lead to Epimenides wishing to erase the foundations of government and the church in Fodlan, while Solomon ultimately is trying to save the world in a more traditional way. And Solomon more than has the means to do it. With his 10 rings of wisdom, he can overwrite the magecraft of anyone else and render it under his own control. It's debatable how this would affect Epimenides, since his magic is far closer to true magic from Fates' power system, but Solomon is still able to perform every form of magecraft easily, which includes force field generation, projection magic that lets him create and reinforce just about anything to a degree, transmutation of matter, necromancy, curse manipulation, etc. Furthermore, his summoning skill allows him to call on the 72 demons of the Goetia that he is often associated with in myth, which all have a wide variety of powers and regularly can fight on even footing with other servants, although many of them are not shown at their full capabilities. And with his clairvoyance being among the best, he can perfectly see the past and future in a way that is treated by others as downright omniscient, and so he is able to plan accordingly. Of course, he's still evidently able to be tricked or blindsided based off him not always winning. Then we get to his noble phantasms, his big trump cards. The first of the three we have the Ars Nova, which is effectively a failsafe move to undo himself and his 10 rings, annihilating the 72 demons of Goetia in case they're a threat. It permanently erases him. And it'd be interesting if Epimenides could exploit that, although I don't really think he could. His next noble phantasm is Ars Paulina, a reality mark, which is a pocket dimension imposed onto real space. Inside this is the Temple of Solomon, where by Solomon's power he can revive anyone with enough magic, and even the Goetia cannot die so long as Solomon can maintain it. And finally, his last noble phantasm is Ars Almadel Salomonus, which is, no joke, a planet-busting super attack which drops a ring of lights down that are powerful enough to break a planet apart. The heat of the attack alone is powerful enough to burn a person's body away, even should the attack be successfully blocked. And said power is enough to circumvent the counterforce, a prescient super energy that exists specifically to prevent planetary destruction. Now, compare that to Epimenides. How does he fare? Well, he's actually frequently gets scaled to another planetary destruction event, specifically where Sothis is attributed to flooding the entire world. Veracity of that claim aside, he's clearly comparable to Sothis in power, at least based on how they alone are the ones able to cut through the barrier between the forbidden realm of Zaharos and reality, meaning they're the only two who can cut through dimensions. Zaharos actually functions a bit like a reality marble from Fate, though it requires a sacrifice to see it done, which is backed up by an empowered Shez later killing a Byleth who is fully controlled by Sothis and screwing with time, while Epimenides' power is screwing with space. Within Zaharos, he's also able to appear to project a limitless amount of spiritual enemies, which he can command, and even reach into the minds of others to project accurate copies of themselves and others. So yeah, Zaharas is basically Epimenides' reality marble, and other people can just use it too. Epimenides has also shown exceptional mastery of both light and dark magic, along with regular elemental spells, and he could challenge, damage, and even defeat the likes of Seros in her prime, successfully warding off 3 saints by himself and their armies. His magic has remarkable range, being able to be cast across an entire battlefield while projecting force fields and summoning Agarthan laser guns at will. Actually, he's pretty much able to teleport in whatever he so pleases due to his total mastery over his unique spatial magic. Furthermore, he's shown the ability to create and use the hero's relics such as his tome Hroti, without the need for a crest, as he was likely their creators. These weapons boost a user's performance dramatically, and combined with his ability to seal the strength and magic of a target makes him a bit more of a match for Solomon. His unsealable magic skill also negates any funny business Solomon might try to pull in that regard, as he's totally immune to magical silencing, and his Tome Buster skill actually gives him an 105% increase to damage when he's fighting one who is using a tome or magic like Solomon would. He likely can also use any of the skills Arval can, which means access to spells like Luna and Miasma, the first of which ignores magical defenses. He'd also get the Duality skill, which is the skill that lets him shift between light and dark magic, and furthermore he gets skills like Agarthan Arcana, which inflicts proportional damage to surrounding foes when he gets hit, or Impair, which extends the duration of status effects he causes. When push comes to shove, Epimenides can channel his power into an awakened state that boosts his attack speed, defenses, and overall stats, and allows for repeated use of his most powerful attacks. In fact, the only thing that proved effective in defeating him was the full power of Seros at her height, and his own power coming from Shez, who needed the aid of the house leaders to even get that far. I could go deeper into this, adding Shez's abilities too, which might include stuff like Dark Spikes and similar spells, but I think you get the point. Epimenides' arsenal is as vast as Solomon's would be, and his skills and unique intricacies would prove to be more than a match than what you might first think. Overall, I think the fight dynamic would actually be rather respectful for these two characters in this series. Both want what is best for their people and for humanity, but they go about it in wholly different ways. Epimenides could begin the battle disregarding Solomon entirely as weak-willed, but grow to respect him by the end, and vice versa. At first, Solomon's magecraft could seem to be unable to match Epimenides' diverse range of skills, but as Solomon breaks out the larger stuff, Epimenides finds himself eclipsed. Genuinely, if Epimenides is unable to activate Zaharas, then I think he'll lose. However, I also think he'd be able to break out of Solomon's reality marble based off what we've seen Shez using his power do as well. But that wouldn't be enough to close the gap between Epimenides and Solomon's Ars Almadel Solomonus. Epimenides equaled Sothis, who at her height was said to have flooded the world. But that is a bit of a hard feat to prove, and it's far from being able to break the planet itself, which means Solomon would still likely win this fight. But hey, it'd be a magical spectacle either way. With those done, we're off to Engage Land, with our first batch of villains all rolled together for a 4v4 death battle, and inspired by one of my commenters, Pit Icarus. The 4 Hounds versus the 4 Fiends from Final Fantasy IV. Quartets of villains who work for a dark overlord but have some faint ties of camaraderie, albeit one is more familial and the other is strictly professional. They also serve to keep tabs on a primary pawn for their overarching master who uses mind control to keep said pawn in check. But as the pawn struggles against their bonds, the group charged with watching them also begin to lose control. In the end, though goodness lays in their hearts, almost all of them wind up dead as a result of the side they've chosen. Since I'll be analyzing these guys as units rather than individually, I'll be rather brief by comparison with each person. To start, the 4 Fiends, Rubicante, Barbarisha, Cagnozo, and Scarmiglione, are elemental spirits from their worlds and are each naturally adept at wielding their specific elements. Rubicante has fire, Barbarisha has wind, Cagnozo has water, and Scarmiglione has earth. Naturally, as bosses, they're all immune to most status effects save things like petrification or paralysis. But they aren't all equally powerful, as Scarmiglione has been noted to be significantly weaker than his counterparts, which causes his teammates to have a low opinion of him. As an undead, Scarmiglione is weak to fire and holy damage while absorbing ice damage, and he tends to attack with cursed energy and poison. Cagnozo can create a water shield, but that shield can be broken by lightning, which he's weak to along with ice. Inside his shell, he can heal himself and resist physical damage, but as you might expect, he can't do much attacking. His attacks consist of summoning miniature tsunamis and casting effects like sleep, paralysis, and silence. Barbarisha, as the wind elemental, molds a tornado around herself which lets her auto-counter most attacks with wind and lightning, and a little bit of petrification to spice it up. And unlike the first two, she has no significant elemental weaknesses that can be exploited. Rubicante, as the leader and most powerful, has total absorption on fire damage and can conceal himself in his cloak, which absorbs all elemental damage, even the ice he's weak to. But while concealed, he's limited to weaker attacks. A final aspect of the four fiends is their combined form, Garion, who's combined most of their abilities into a single larger entity, though I don't know how canon that is since you only encounter it as a super boss on repeated playthroughs. Somewhat interestingly, the four fiends function just like the kind of RPG party you'd need to take on all those bosses, including Garion, with all the defensive, offensive, supportive, and utility roles cleared even without any emblems. Of course, they all could have emblems such as Sigurd, Roy, or Celica, who they tend to be paired with, but I'm not sure if they'd be given them. If they were, they couldn't engage like normal, since they'd be in their Fell Dragon forms, and therefore more consistently supplementary than what the player can use them like. But as for the units themselves, the first to mention is Mavir, naturally, as he actually joins as a recruitable character able to wield lances and staves. His contemplative skill boosts his defenses when he waits or uses items, and his reforged skill can heal an ally who has experienced the break effect, which happens when they are disarmed due to an advantaged weapon used against them. Equipped with his signature magical flame axe and up to C-rank staves, or B-rank staves, so assuming his enemy stats, this includes the self-teleporting rewarp, the obstacle creating obstruct, the silence and freeze staffs, and many healing staffs that would actually be helpful in this team battle. Marnie is a fair bit bulkier as a general, wielding her signature magical hurricane axe, which is empowered by the wind, along with various great axes, and her swap skill lets her trade places with an endangered ally, taking possible damage the others can't. Briss is a powerful sage that also uses staves along with magic like the wind-based Excalibur, fire-based Bolganun, or Nova, which is empowered to hit at a faster rate than normal spells. Equipped with Fortify, Recover, and the like, he's the powerful healer that Mavir only dabbles in, but with less physical defense. In exchange, he has the Unbreakable skill that makes him immune to the aforementioned break effect, along with Spell Harmony to empower him based on how many adjacent allies also wield tomes. Seal Resistance lowers an enemy's magical defense and is therefore very good for all the hounds, who all wield magically based weapons. Speaking of, the leader of the four hounds, Zephia, is a mage dragon, but one who never transforms herself, instead riding a wyvern and wielding swords and tomes. Equipped with the likes of rapiers and electrical levin swords, or legendary weapons such as Dorchios and Khalid Bolg, she capitalizes on these weapons with her skill Soulblade that, when attacking with a sword, the damage she does is based off the average of her opponent's defense and resistance. Based off such versatility and teamwork, I'd give the advantage to the four hounds, even discrediting any emblems as I've done so far. Each of the four fiends are good at working alone for a common goal, but the four hounds regularly work and synergize together, and as such are able to put up a fight against even the likes of Alir, who's a beast when you really break it down. Even with the fiends combined as Garion, I think the hounds would secure a win. Multiple sources of healing, synergistic skills, and a history of fighting powerful foes together would, to me, suggest that in this 4v4, it'd be the hounds who come out on top against the fiends. Moving to the big bad of Fire Emblem Engage, we have Sombron versus Thanos. Yes, actually. Purple conquerors and collectors that seek to bring together a certain collection of small items which combined give universal powers, but even when they do achieve that, they're defeated due to the efforts of many heroes uniting to defeat them, including their own children. Thanos is very well known and has even shown up on Death Battle before, so I'll be somewhat brief on him. Though I should say I'd prefer a battle between Sombron and MCU Thanos to make a fairer fight, but in terms of themes, comic Thanos is a little bit more appropriate as both he and Sombron are doing what they do to reunite with someone. The Zero emblem for Sombron and Death for Thanos. However, I'll focus mostly on MCU Thanos since A, easier to comprehend feats, and B, comics Thanos has been covered by Death Battle before. So, to start, Thanos is brutally strong, even on his own, able to curb stomp the Hulk in a fistfight, and this power only grows with the Infinity Gauntlet. The Power Stone amplifies all his power substantially, the Space Stone can fold and rip apart space and be used to shred a moon, and the Reality Stone can transmute the surroundings and create tangible illusions, though the limitations of this are unknown. The Time and Mind Stones are kind of self-explanatory, and the Soul Stone does a grand total of nothing while present, but combined together and Thanos can affect the entire universe with a snap, though the powers do leave permanent scarring. Compare that to comic Thanos, who can do all this casually and without worrying about losing an arm, and instead can just throw solar systems around, prevent a person's soul from passing on to the afterlife, and seeing time as a constant loop. Thankfully for Sombron, he's closer to MCU Thanos' level. And a little bit above, maybe. We'll get there. For starters, as a Fell Dragon, he has the power to affect and manipulate the lives and souls of others, such as with his undead, who even maintain their personalities. He can similarly affect the minds of those connected to him by blood with his power, as he does with Veil and the helmet he had crafted to control her. Master of Dark Magic, his signature Obscurity Tome forms a flaming black tornado from the base of the ground, engulfing an opponent. But his greater power is his ability to call on Emblem, heroes of other worlds bound to rings, which he later used to channel into himself, quote, infinite power, which gave him the ability to do things like dragging a continent from beneath the ocean and opening a hole between universes. These emblems, as I mentioned with the Hounds, act more passively and consistently while in these forms, and he can equip them to any undead and make them use the emblems with expertise. As demonstrated within the space between realities, he can also summon dark emblems, representing the greatest villains of these many worlds, including almost every major villain we've covered so far. These further empower his soldiers and would be entirely in his use. Additionally, he draws from their power to create a force field around himself that reduces all damage to almost zero while they all live, and he can summon more and remake that barrier. His breath attack comes as a powerful beam that leaves poisonous miasma in his wake, and can send quakes across the ground and air with that same energy. Sombron as full power is more than a match for MCU Thanos, and his ability to open holes between realities could be a useful loophole in the Infinity Gauntlet's powers, as they don't work outside the universe they come from, at least in the comics. It's unconfirmed if that's true in the MCU. But if you put that aside, I'm still unsure which would be able to win. Though I lean more towards Thanos, Sombron has enough unique abilities and feats to nudge out a win. For the setup and dynamic, I can see Sombron seeking out the Infinity Stones for the same reason he sought out the emblems, to use their power, and this leads him into conflict with Thanos. As time goes on, Sombron ridicules the slim amounts of humanity within Thanos, which in turn leads to Thanos demeaning Sombron as overly cruel, since Thanos sees himself as a savior. But in the end, both are fighting with the same ferocity until one of them manages to use their own nigh-omnipotent powers to erase the others. Maybe literally. Here at last, the final matchup and the final villain of Fire Emblem up to this point. Villain of the Fell Xenologue of Engage, Rafal, the one-time heir and successor to his world, Sombron, and his opponent from Xenoblade, Dixon of the Trinity, the first disciple of the god Zanza. Once praised in their world as heroes who fended off greater forces, they are in truth the disciples of evil entities who wish to erase all life in this world, whether just to prove a point or to remake the world again. They begin by lying to the heroes and ingratiating themselves as a family member to them, Rafal pretending to be Nell's brother and Dixon raising Shulk as his own, before inevitably revealing themselves with almost literal stabbings in the back. Near the end, they transform into their true, more powerful forms, but are beaten by the very people they betrayed, though their stories end differently. Nell almost dies to save Rafal from Sombron's latent influence, and Dixon dies at Shulk's hands, finally at peace with how far his son has come. Dixon is of the giant race and can change between his human, or Homs, form and his natural one, but maintains his ability to use ether as a weapon, which he often channels in gun swords in either form. As a Homs, his attacks are somewhat limited to just dealing electric damage with Thunderbolt or healing himself with Heal Bolt, and he comes with the Topple Resist gem built into his Homs weapon, Saber, as well as the Unbeatable gem, but that's more of a game mechanics thing than anything, I believe. Even so, he'd lose that when he transformed into a giant anyway, and gains abilities like Treacherous Anger, which gives him haste, increasing his attack speed, and Righteous Anger, which gives him the Crazed effect, which increases his strength by 25% and adds haste to 25% as well. Chaos Bullet pierces defenses, Silent Chaos seals the enemy's arts, and Chaos Dash and Chaos Combo topple an enemy and deal triple damage when said enemy is toppled, respectively. But his last trump card is Dark Power, which removes all debuffs, grants him debuff immunity, and instantly restores a portion of his HP. He fought alongside Dunban and Mumkar in the war against the Mechon and would later fight on near even footing with the main party to give them a real struggle before his death. But how does he compare to Rafal? Well, Rafal has perhaps the most sophisticated case of necromancy in Engage, keeping alive the entire continent of Helios and the people within it as corrupted. Dixon can command Telia, the flesh dragons that work as servants of Zanza, but Rafal's got a whole world of people at his command. Independent of that, his rivalry skill is reliant on allies and regularly killing foes, so it's kind of useless unless he has allies, and whether he'd be able to use the emblem bracelets is a debate in of itself. So we'll focus on his more direct powers. He has access to various axes like his signature Revanche, and more importantly, all axes up to rank A, which includes the Hurricane Axe I mentioned before, the Killer Axe for increased critical chance, and the Brave Axe for increased attack rate. His power to become a Fell Dragon is tied to his various Dragon Stones that change the effects of the attack, allowing for increased range and whether it's magical or physical, but they all have the foe's defenses and resistances after the attack. At his highest potential, he is a great Fell Dragon, able to fire beams of Fell energy that ignore defense and resistance altogether, while endlessly summoning Corrupted and draining the essence from his own troops to heal and empower himself. Now, add the emblem bracelets and this becomes a no-brainer, but without them, Rafal and Dixon are rather close until Rafal goes into his Great Dragon form, if he'd have access to that. I could see Dixon becoming overwhelmed by Rafal's Corrupted at first if he was without Telethia, resulting in Dixon changing to his giant form and forcing Rafal to transform in kind, with the only chance he has for beating Dixon being his Great Fell Dragon form. In terms of the dynamic, you could set an interesting dichotomy between Rafal, who turned to the side of good eventually, while Dixon died a villain, even while he did love his adoptive son. And Rafal can call out such a contradiction within Dixon. Rafal wouldn't show mercy, of course, even as a hero he's the ruthless type, but it'd be a chance for fascinating characterization. And with that, we're done. Every single major villain and/or antagonist of Fire Emblem matched up for their own death battles. If you want, go ahead and compare my last series and see whether you think I did better this time around in picking my pairs, but the fact you're here listening to this means a lot either way. I'm glad I was able to keep my promise to all those who were watching me before my channel started to get more views, and I hope those of you who have stuck around this long are subscribed, because I hope to keep on growing. A shout out to my patrons who continue as always to encourage me to work on this channel and my content for as many people as possible to enjoy. You're all wonderful. Joining my Patreon or as a YouTube member gives you access to a private Discord server, early access to certain videos, and chances to interact with me directly so I can achieve feedback right from the source. It's all optional, of course, but even so, I'd appreciate it if you liked, commented, subscribed, and shared the video around, since all that does just as much to help this channel grow. I'll see you all soon as I continue to grow and work on this channel, and I hope you all stick around for that. Until then, I am the Hearth Guy, and I will see you all next time around the hearth.